The dust devils danced across Main Street in Knights Ferry, California. On the morning Theresa Ellington turned 33, and she watched them from behind the counter of her father's general store with the same resigned expression she wore when customers whispered about her unmarried state, just loud enough for her to hear. The year was 1878, and in a town where most women married by 18 and were mothers of 3 by 25, Theresa had become something of a curiosity. She stood tall at 5'8", with auburn hair she refused to pin up in the demure fashion other women favored, instead letting it fall in a thick braid down her back. Her hands were calloused from lifting crates and her mind sharp from keeping the store's books, qualities that should have made her a catch for any sensible man. But sensible men in Knights Ferry seemed to prefer softer hands and quieter minds. Her father had died 2 winters past, leaving her the store in a small house on the edge of town. Her mother had passed when Theresa was just 16, taken by fever that swept through the valley that terrible summer. With no siblings and no husband, she had become the subject of endless speculation. The church ladies clucked their tongues. The young mothers pitied her. The unmarried men looked right through her as if she were a window pane. Theresa had stopped caring somewhere around her 30th birthday. Or at least, she told herself she had stopped caring. The truth lived somewhere deeper, in the place where hope refused to completely die no matter how many times reality stamped it down. The bell above the door jangled and Mrs. Henderson swept in, her considerable bulk straining against her corset. "Good morning, Miss Ellington," she said with exaggerated sweetness. "I need 3 yards of that blue calico for my daughter's wedding dress. You remember Susan, don't you? She is just 19 and already making such a fine match with the banker's son." "I remember Susan," Theresa said evenly, measuring out the fabric with practiced hands. "The blue calico is a lovely choice." Mrs. Henderson leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that still carried across the entire store. "You know, dear, if you were a bit more agreeable, perhaps smiled more often, showed a little softness, there might still be hope for you, even at your age." Theresa wrapped the fabric with deliberate care, keeping her face neutral. "That will be $2.15, Mrs. Henderson." The older woman sniffed, paid, and departed in a rustle of petticoats. Theresa allowed herself exactly 5 seconds of clenched fury before smoothing her apron and returning to the inventory list she had been working on. The store needed ordering. The accounts needed balancing. Life continued regardless of well-meaning cruelty. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting golden rectangles across the wooden floor when the stranger rode into town. Theresa noticed him because everyone noticed strangers in Knights Ferry. He sat tall in the saddle, a working cowboy by the look of him, with a battered hat pulled low and dust coating his clothes. His horse was a sturdy bay, well cared for despite the evidence of long travel. He dismounted outside the saloon across the street, and Theresa found her gaze following him despite herself. There was something about the way he moved, efficient and unhurried, that suggested confidence without arrogance. Then she shook her head at her own foolishness. She was 33 years old, not some starry-eyed girl who still believed in fairy tales. The rest of the day passed in its usual rhythm. She sold nails to the blacksmith, thread to the seamstress, coffee and sugar to a young mother with a baby on her hip and exhaustion in her eyes. As the sun began its descent toward the hills, Theresa closed up the store, checked the locks twice as she always did, and walked home through the lengthening shadows. Her house sat at the end of Willow Street, a modest structure with a small garden she tended when time allowed. Tonight she found a package on her doorstep wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a book, Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, and a note in her friend Margaret's flowing script. Happy birthday, dear Theresa. May this year bring you all the joy you deserve. Theresa smiled despite herself. Margaret was one of the few married women in town who treated her like a person rather than a cautionary tale. They had been friends since childhood, and Margaret's husband owned the livery stable at the opposite end of Main Street. She made herself a simple dinner of bread, cheese, and preserved peaches, then settled into her father's old chair by the window with the book. But her mind kept wandering to the stranger on the bay horse, and she closed the book with an exasperated sigh at her own distraction. The next morning brought the usual Saturday bustle to the store. Farmers came to town for supplies, wives shopped for the week ahead, and children pressed their noses against the glass jar of peppermint sticks Theresa kept on the counter. She was helping old Mr. Walsh select a new harness when the door opened and the stranger walked in. Up close, he was younger than she had thought, perhaps 35 or 36, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. A scar traced a thin white line along his jaw. He removed his hat politely, revealing dark brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Morning, madam," he said, his voice deep and roughened by dust and disuse. "I am looking for work supplies. Gloves, rope, maybe a new bedroll if you have got one." "I have all of those," Theresa said, finishing with Mr. Walsh and directing him to pay at the counter. "The gloves are on the wall there, rope is in the back corner, and bedrolls are on the shelf behind you." He nodded his thanks and began browsing. Theresa tried not to watch him, but found her attention drawn back repeatedly as she helped other customers. He moved through the store methodically, examining items with care before making his selections. Finally, he brought his choices to the counter: heavy leather gloves, 50 feet of good rope, a sturdy bedroll, and a bar of soap. "You are new to Knights Ferry," Theresa observed as she tallied his purchases. It was not quite a question. "Just rode in yesterday," he confirmed. "Name is Tobias Turner. I heard the Thompson Ranch north of here might be hiring." "They are," Theresa said. "Lost 3 hands last month when they headed to the silver mines in Nevada. Mr. Thompson has been desperate for reliable help." Tobias paid for his items, their fingers briefly touching as she handed him his change. The contact lasted only a moment but sent an unexpected warmth through her hand. "Thank you, madam. I appreciate the information." "Theresa," she said before she could stop herself. "Theresa Ellington." "This is my store." Something flickered in his storm cloud eyes, there and gone too quickly to identify. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Ellington." After he left, she stood behind the counter longer than necessary, one hand unconsciously rubbing the spot where his fingers had touched hers. Then she squared her shoulders and returned to work. She had learned long ago not to let her imagination run wild over brief encounters with handsome strangers, but fate, it seemed, had other plans. Tobias Turner did indeed find work at the Thompson Ranch, and as the ranch's primary supply source, Theresa saw him regularly over the following weeks. He came to town every Saturday with a list of needs for the ranch, always polite, always courteous, treating her with a respect that was so genuine it almost hurt. Unlike other men who either ignored her entirely or spoke to her, with the patronizing patience reserved for spinsters and children, Tobias addressed her as an equal. He asked her opinion on the quality of different ropes, listened when she explained which grain stored longest, and once spent 20 minutes discussing the merits of various saddle oils as if her knowledge mattered. "You know quite a bit about ranching for a shopkeeper," he observed one morning in late April, selecting a new curry comb from her display. "My father supplied half the ranches in this valley for 30 years, Theresa replied. I grew up learning what worked and what did not. Men might not think women can understand such things, but I assure you, keeping accurate inventory requires knowing your products thoroughly. Tobias looked at her directly then, and she felt the full weight of his attention like a physical thing. Any man who thinks women cannot understand practical matters is a fool. I have known plenty of ranch women who could outwork, outthink, and outshoot most of the men I have ridden with. Something in Theresa's chest loosened slightly at those words. That is an uncommon opinion in Knights Ferry. Maybe that is because Knights Ferry men have been too comfortable for too long, Tobias said. No offense to your town, but some of the attitudes I have encountered here seem about 20 years behind the times. Theresa laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in weeks. You will not hear me arguing with that assessment. After that conversation, something shifted between them, not dramatically, but in small increments. Tobias began timing his supply runs for the slower parts of the day when Theresa was less likely to be overwhelmed with customers. Their conversations lengthened, ranging beyond business to books, politics, and observations about life. She learned he had grown up in Texas, lost his parents young, and spent the past 15 years working cattle drives and ranch jobs across half the Western Territories. He learned she loved Shakespeare, could calculate compound interest in her head, and harbored a secret fondness for adventure novels. Why did you settle here? Tobias asked one afternoon in May as she helped him load supplies into his wagon. A woman with your head for business could make a fortune in a bigger city. Theresa paused, a sack of flour balanced on her hip. This store was my father's dream. When he died, I could not bear to sell it, and beyond that, where would I go? A woman alone traveling to San Francisco or Sacramento would face questions I have no desire to answer. Questions about why you are not married, Tobias said quietly. She met his eyes, surprised by his directness. Among other things. Though I am sure you have noticed that Knights Ferry has already decided I am firmly on the shelf. Knights Ferry is blind, Tobias said, and there was heat in his voice that made her pulse quicken. Any town that cannot see your worth is not worth much itself. Before Theresa could respond, Mrs. Henderson and two other church ladies rounded the corner, their eyes widening at the sight of Theresa and Tobias standing so close together beside his wagon. Theresa stepped back automatically, creating proper distance, hating herself for the instinct even as she obeyed it. Miss Ellington, Mrs. Henderson said with false brightness. How nice to see you conducting business. We were just on our way to discuss the church social next month. We do hope you will contribute your excellent lemon cake again. Of course, Theresa said stiffly. The ladies moved on, but not before Theresa caught their backward glances and knowing looks. She sighed, suddenly exhausted. Tobias loaded the last of his supplies in silence, then turned to her. Does it bother you? He asked. What they think? It did not used to, Theresa admitted. I told myself I had made peace with being the town spinster, but lately... She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. But lately, Tobias prompted gently. She looked at him, this kind stranger who had somehow become the bright spot in her weeks, and felt the dangerous flutter of something she had thought long buried. Lately, I find myself wondering if I settled for peace too early. Tobias held her gaze for a long moment. Then he climbed into his wagon and tipped his hat to her. I will see you next Saturday, Miss Ellington. As he drove away, Theresa stood in the street longer than was proper, watching until his wagon disappeared around the bend in the road. She did not notice Margaret watching from the doorway of the livery stable, a knowing smile on her face. That evening, Margaret appeared on Theresa's doorstep with a basket of fresh biscuits and determination in her eyes. "We need to talk," she announced, pushing past Theresa into the house without waiting for invitation. "About the cowboy who looks at you like you are water in the desert." "Margaret, that is absurd," Theresa protested, but her friend was already settling into the kitchen chair with the air of someone planning a long conversation. "I have eyes, Theresa. I have seen how he comes to town every Saturday like clockwork. I have watched the two of you talking outside your store, how he leans in when you speak, how you smile at him when you think no one is watching." Theresa busied herself making tea, her hands needing something to do. "He is a customer. We have pleasant conversations. That is all." "Horse feathers," Margaret said inelegantly. "That man is courting you, Theresa, even if he has not put a name to it yet. And unless I am very much mistaken, you are not opposed to being courted." The teakettle whistled and Theresa poured with shaking hands. "I am 33 years old, Margaret." Even if Tobias Turner had any interest beyond friendly conversation, which I doubt, can you imagine what this town would say? The spinster finally catching a man, how desperate she must have been, how he must be settling for whatever he could get at his age. Margaret reached across the table and gripped Theresa's wrist firmly. "Listen to me, dear friend. You have spent the last 10 years shrinking yourself to fit their narrow expectations. You have let their small-mindedness convince you that being independent and intelligent makes you unmarriable. But that man does not look at you like you are a consolation prize. He looks at you like you are exactly what he has been searching for." Theresa sank into her chair, tea forgotten. "What if you are wrong? What if I let myself hope and it leads nowhere? I have built a life here, Margaret. A lonely life, perhaps, but a stable one. Hope is dangerous." "So is never taking chances," Margaret countered. "You could spend the next 40 years safe behind that store counter, never risking anything, never feeling anything beyond resignation. Or you could let yourself be open to the possibility that something wonderful might happen, that you might be allowed happiness even at 33. After Margaret left, Theresa sat in the gathering darkness and let herself really examine the feelings she had been pushing down for weeks. The anticipation she felt every Saturday morning, the way her heart beat faster when Tobias walked through her door, the loneliness that felt sharper on Sunday mornings when she knew it would be 6 full days before she saw him again. The dangerous, terrifying, exhilarating possibility that maybe, just maybe, she was falling in love. June arrived with scorching heat that baked the valley and turned the grass golden brown. The Thompson Ranch increased their supply orders as they prepared for the summer cattle drive to Sacramento. Tobias began coming to town twice weekly, and Theresa found excuses to keep the store open later on the days she knew he would arrive. One evening as she was closing up, Tobias appeared with 2 glasses of lemonade from the hotel restaurant. "You looked hot earlier," he said simply. "Thought you might appreciate this." They sat on the bench outside her store, watching the last shoppers head home and the saloon across the street begin to fill with off-duty ranch hands and miners. The lemonade was tart and cold, perfect against the oppressive heat. "Can I ask you something?" Tobias said after a long, comfortable silence. "You can ask," Theresa replied. "I cannot promise I will answer." He smiled slightly. "Fair enough. Why have you never married? And before you give me the answer you give everyone else, I am asking for the real reason." Theresa watched the dust devils dancing in the street, considering her words carefully. "When I was younger I had suitors. Not many, but a few. One in particular, Robert Chambers, courted me seriously when I was 22. We were on the verge of engagement when he made it clear he expected me to sell the store after we married. He said a wife of his would not need to work, that it reflected poorly on a man if his wife had to manage a business. "You chose the store," Tobias said. "It was not a question." "I chose myself," Theresa corrected. The store was part of it, yes. But more than that, I could not imagine spending my life with someone who saw my capabilities as a problem to be solved rather than a quality to be valued. After that, word got around that I was too independent, too strong-willed. The few men who showed interest wanted to tame me, not know me, so I stopped entertaining the idea entirely. Tobias set his empty glass down on the bench between them. "Their loss," he said quietly. "A woman who knows her own mind and is not afraid to speak, it is worth 10 who simply agree with everything a man says." "Is that so?" Theresa asked, her voice lighter than she felt. "And I suppose you have extensive experience with strong-willed women." "My mother," Tobias said, and there was warmth in his voice now, "ran a ranch in Texas with my father for 20 years. When father died, everyone expected her to sell and move to town. Instead, she hired a foreman and ran the place herself for another 5 years until a bad drought forced her to sell. She taught me that strength has nothing to do with gender and everything to do with character." "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Theresa said softly. "She was. She died 7 years ago, but I still hear her voice sometimes, especially when I am being stubborn or foolish." He turned to face Theresa fully. "She would have liked you. She always said the measure of a person was not in how they handled success, but in how they carried themselves when the world decided to be unfair." The moment stretched between them, weighted with things unsaid. Theresa felt it like a physical presence, the possibility hovering in the air. Then someone called Tobias's name from the saloon, breaking the spell, and he stood reluctantly. "I should go. Early start tomorrow. But Theresa," he waited until she met his eyes. "Thank you for the conversation, for all our conversations. They are the best part of my weeks here." After he left, Theresa sat on the bench until full darkness fell, her heart full of dangerous hope. The summer progressed in waves of heat and dust. Theresa watched the ranch hands come and go, saw couples promenading on Sunday afternoons, listened to the constant chatter about marriages and births and all the normal progressions of life that had somehow passed her by. But for the first time in years, the watching did not hurt quite so much. She had something of her own now, even if she could not quite name it yet. Tobias brought her wildflowers once, claiming he found them on the ride into town and thought they were too pretty to waste. Another time, he stayed to help her reorganize the heavy stock on her upper shelves, doing in an hour what would have taken her most of a day. Small gestures, but they accumulated like gold dust in a pan, evidence of something valuable building grain by grain. In July, disaster struck the Thompson Ranch. A lightning fire swept through the northern pastures, destroying fencing and outbuildings. No one died, but the damage was extensive. Tobias came to town that Saturday looking exhausted, ordering supplies for rebuilding efforts, and Theresa saw the toll the endless work was taking on him. "You look like you have not slept in days," she said bluntly as she assembled his order. 3 days, he admitted. "We have been fighting spot fires and trying to keep the cattle from scattering. Mr. Thompson lost a quarter of his herd before we got things under control." Without thinking, Theresa said, "Come to dinner tonight. I have stew already made and you need a proper meal before you fall over." Tobias looked at her in surprise. "Theresa, I cannot impose. It is not an imposition if I am offering. Besides, you have bought enough lemonade and helped me enough times. Consider it repayment." She kept her voice light, but her heart hammered at her own boldness. That evening, Tobias appeared at her door clean scrubbed and nervous, his hat in his hands. Theresa had set her small table with her mother's dishes and made cornbread to go with the stew. They ate in surprisingly easy conversation, and she learned about his childhood in Texas, his first cattle drive at 15, the places he had seen across the West. "Why California?" she asked as she poured coffee after dinner. "Of all the places you could have settled, why here?" Tobias stared into his cup as if searching for answers in the dark liquid. "I was tired of moving, tired of never having anything of my own, never putting down roots. I had saved enough money to buy a small place eventually, and California seemed as good a spot as any." He paused, then added quietly, "That was before I met you." Theresa's hand froze halfway to her own cup. "Tobias, I know," he said quickly. "I know what your life is like here, what people say. The last thing I want is to make things harder for you. But I also cannot keep pretending that coming to town twice a week is purely for supplies. I come because I want to see you. I come because talking to you is the highlight of every damn week, and I think about you far more than is probably sensible for a cowboy who owns little more than a good horse and a bedroll." The room felt too small suddenly, the air too thick. Theresa could hear her own pulse in her ears, could feel the weight of the moment pressing down. This was it, the cliff edge. She could step back into safety and loneliness, or she could jump. "I think about you too," she whispered. "Every day, every night. I have been telling myself it was foolish, that nothing could come of it, that I was too old for such feelings. But Margaret says I have been hiding behind fear for too long." Tobias reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "You are not too old. Neither of us is too old. And if you are willing, I would like to court you properly. With full knowledge that this town will talk, that people will have opinions, and that I do not care one bit about any of it." Theresa looked at their joined hands, then up at his face, seeing hope and determination and something deeper that made her breath catch. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I would like that very much." The kiss that followed was tentative and sweet, a promise rather than a claim. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling despite their nervousness. "Fair warning," Theresa said, trying for lightness though her voice shook slightly. "The gossips will have us married by Sunday." "Let them talk," Tobias said firmly. "I have waited 35 years to find someone worth staying put for. I am not going to let small-minded gossip change that." True to Theresa's prediction, the news that Tobias Turner had been seen leaving her house after dark spread through Knights Ferry like the lightning fire that had ravaged the Thompson Ranch. By church on Sunday, everyone knew, and the whispers followed Theresa like a swarm of flies. Margaret, bless her, sat beside Theresa in her usual pew and glared at anyone who stared too long. After the service, as the congregation milled about outside, Mrs. Henderson approached with her gaggle of friends. "Miss Ellington," she said with false sweetness dripping from every word. "We heard you had a gentleman caller. At your age, one cannot be too careful about reputation. A man who visits after dark is often looking for something other than honorable courtship." Before Theresa could formulate a response that would not make things worse, Tobias appeared at her elbow. He must have ridden into town specifically for this, still wearing his work clothes but clean and presentable. He took off his hat and addressed Mrs. Henderson with perfect politeness. "Madam, I believe you are speaking about me. Let me clarify my intentions so there is no misunderstanding in this community. I am courting Miss Ellington with the full, honorable intention of asking her to marry me when the time is appropriate. She is a woman of impeccable character, and anyone who suggests otherwise will answer to me directly." The bold declaration left Mrs. Henderson speechless, a rare and beautiful sight. Around them, the crowd buzzed with reaction. Theresa felt her face flame, but Tobias's hand found hers and squeezed gently. Together, they walked through the parting crowd to where Theresa's small buggy waited. "You did not have to do that," Theresa said once they were out of immediate earshot. Yes, I did, Tobias replied. I will not have your name dragged through mud because of me. And I meant every word. When the time is right, Theresa, I am going to ask you to be my wife. I want there to be no doubt in anyone's mind about my intentions. Over the following weeks, Tobias courted her with a determination that both thrilled and terrified Theresa. He took her on chaperoned picnics with Margaret and her husband. He attended church services sitting in the pew behind her. He helped repair a leak in her roof and fixed the stubborn lock on her storage room door. He brought her books from the traveling salesman who passed through, remembering offhand comments she had made about wanting to read certain authors. In August, he took her to the county fair in Stockton, a full day's journey by wagon. They walked through the exhibitions arm in arm, ate roasted corn and watched horse races, and on the ride home under a canopy of stars, Tobias told her about the small ranch he had been saving to buy. There is a place about 10 miles north of the Thompson spread, he said. Just came available. 160 acres with a creek running through it, decent grazing, and a house that needs work but has good bones. I have been saving for nearly 15 years, and I finally have enough for the down payment. Theresa listened to the excitement in his voice and felt something shift inside her chest. That sounds wonderful, Tobias. You must be thrilled. I am, he said, then hesitated. But I also find myself thinking about more than just the land. A ranch needs a lot of work for one person. It needs. He trailed off, then started again. Theresa, we have been courting for 2 months now. I know that is not long by traditional standards, but I am not a young man anymore, and I know my own mind. I want to build a life on that land, and I want to build it with you. Her heart hammered so hard she thought he must surely hear it. Tobias, are you saying? Not yet, he said quickly. I am not proposing yet. I want to do this properly, and there are things I need to arrange first. But I wanted you to know where my thoughts are, where my heart is, so you can be thinking about it too. September arrived with slightly cooler temperatures and the preparations for harvest. The Thompson Ranch finalized their plans for the fall cattle drive, which meant Tobias would be gone for nearly 6 weeks starting in early October. The thought of not seeing him for that long made Theresa realize just how deeply he had become woven into the fabric of her daily life. I will miss you, she admitted the Saturday before he was due to leave. They were sitting on her front porch in the evening, properly visible to any passers-by but still affording them some privacy. I will miss you too, Tobias said, but when I get back, there are things we need to discuss. Plans to make. His hand covered hers on the porch railing. Will you wait for me, Theresa? I have waited 33 years, she said with a slight smile. 6 more weeks will not kill me. But the 6 weeks felt interminable. Theresa threw herself into work, reorganizing the entire store, updating her inventory systems, and deep cleaning every corner. Margaret visited regularly, keeping her company and speculating endlessly about what Tobias might be planning. He is going to propose, Margaret said with certainty one afternoon in late October. Mark my words, he will have a ring when he returns. You are ridiculous, Theresa said, but hope fluttered in her chest like a caged bird. When Tobias finally returned in mid-November, dusty and trail-worn but grinning broadly, Theresa felt her careful composure crack. He came straight to the store, not even stopping at his boarding house first, and the look on his face made her pulse race. I have news, he said without preamble. I bought the ranch, signed the papers 3 days ago in Sacramento before we headed back. It is mine, Theresa. I have land of my own. She came around the counter and hugged him without thinking, propriety abandoned in the face of genuine joy. Tobias, that is wonderful. Congratulations. He held her tightly, his face buried in her hair. Come see it with me, tomorrow. Let me show you what I have been planning, what I have been dreaming about." The next day was Sunday, and Margaret eagerly agreed to chaperone. The three of them took Tobias's wagon north along the dusty road until they reached a gate with a newly erected sign reading Turner Ranch. The property beyond was beautiful in a raw, untamed way. Golden grass rippled in the breeze, oak trees dotted the rolling hills, and in the distance, Theresa could see the glint of water. The house was small but solidly built, with a wide porch and good views in all directions. Inside, it was clearly empty and neglected, but Theresa could see the potential. Good wood floors, a large fireplace, windows that let in generous light. "It needs work," Tobias admitted, watching her explore. "The roof needs patching, windows need new panes, and the kitchen is practically non-existent. But the foundation is sound and the structure is solid." Theresa ran her hand along the fireplace mantel, imagining this space filled with furniture and warmth and life. "It is perfect," she said honestly. "Or it will be with care." Margaret had tactfully wandered outside to examine the garden plot, leaving them alone. Tobias crossed the empty room to stand beside Theresa, both of them looking out the window at the land beyond. "I can see it," Theresa said softly. "Curtains on these windows, a table there, chairs by the fire, a real home." "Is that what you want?" Tobias asked, his voice low and intent. "Can you see yourself here, Theresa? Because I cannot see this place, cannot see my future without you in it." She turned to face him, heart in her throat. "Tobias." "Not yet," he said again, echoing his words from August. "Soon, but not yet. There is something I need to do first, a proper way to do this. But I needed you to see this place, to know what I am offering before I offer it." The ride back to town was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. Margaret kept shooting knowing looks at Theresa, who ignored her studiously. But that night, alone in her house, Theresa let herself really imagine it. Leaving the store, leaving town, becoming Theresa Turner and building a life on that beautiful ranch. The thought should have terrified her, but instead it filled her with a peace she had not felt in years. November progressed toward December, and with it came Theresa's 33rd birthday. She tried not to think about it, tried not to count the days until that marking point that had loomed so large in her mind all year. 33 and unmarried. 33 and still alone. But the loneliness felt different now, temporary rather than permanent. The morning of her birthday dawned clear and cold. Theresa opened the store as usual, expecting the day to pass like any other. But Margaret appeared at noon with a basket of lunch and strict instructions to close up for an hour. "You cannot work through your birthday," Margaret scolded. "Besides, I have it on good authority that you are needed elsewhere this afternoon." "Needed where?" Theresa asked suspiciously. Margaret just smiled mysteriously. "Close the store at 4 o'clock. Wear your blue dress, the one with the good lace collar. And be ready when I come to collect you at 5. Theresa opened her mouth to argue, but Margaret was already sweeping out the door. The afternoon crawled by with agonizing slowness. When 4 o'clock finally arrived, Theresa locked up and hurried home to change. The blue dress was her finest, saved for special occasions. She had not worn it in over a year. At precisely 5 o'clock, Margaret arrived in her husband's best buggy, looking far too pleased with herself. She drove them out of town, heading north on the road to the Turner Ranch, and Theresa's heart began to hammer. "Margaret, what is happening?" "Patience," her friend said infuriatingly. The Turner Ranch appeared ahead, but something was different. Lights glowed in the windows of the house, and as they drew closer, Theresa could see that the porch had been swept clean and decorated with pine boughs. Margaret stopped the buggy, and Tobias emerged from the house, wearing what must have been his finest clothes. his hair neatly combed and his face freshly shaved. He helped Theresa down from the buggy, while Margaret drove away with a cheerful wave, leaving them alone under the vast evening sky. Tobias offered Theresa his arm and guided her toward the house. "I know this is unorthodox," he said, "but I wanted today to be special. I wanted to give you something no one else ever has." Inside, the empty house had been transformed. Candles flickered on every surface, casting warm, dancing shadows. A table had been set up near the fireplace where a crackling fire burned cheerfully. 2 chairs, borrowed from somewhere, sat waiting, and on the mantel was a single perfect rose in a glass bottle. "Tobias," Theresa breathed. "This is beautiful. You are beautiful," he said simply, "and you deserve to be told that, to be celebrated, not pitied or gossiped about or made to feel less than because you chose to wait for something real." He guided her to one of the chairs and produced a basket from behind the table. Inside was a meal he must have prepared himself or convinced someone to prepare: roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables, and even a small cake. They ate and talked as darkness fell completely outside, cocooned in their circle of candlelight and warmth. Tobias told her about the plans he had for the ranch, the cattle he wanted to raise, the improvements he hoped to make over time. Theresa found herself adding to those plans, suggesting ideas, seeing their future unfold like a map spread between them. When the meal was finished, Tobias stood and offered his hand. He led her to the center of the room, and in the flickering firelight, he took both her hands in his. "Theresa Ellington," he began, and she could hear the slight tremor in his voice that betrayed his nervousness. "I have spent the better part of my adult life wandering, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home, never finding anything worth building toward. I told myself I was free, unencumbered, but the truth is I was just lonely and did not know how to name it." Tears were already forming in Theresa's eyes, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Then I rode into Knights Ferry 8 months ago, walked into a general store, and met a woman who looked at me like I was just a person. Not a paycheck, not a temporary fixture, just another human being worthy of respect and honest conversation. You challenged me, made me laugh, made me think. You showed me what it meant to be strong in the face of a world that punishes that strength. And somewhere along the way, I fell completely, irrevocably in love with you." Tobias released one of her hands and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. He lowered himself to one knee, and Theresa's tears spilled over, running freely down her cheeks. "This town decided you were unmarriable, that 33 was too old, that independence made you undesirable. But they are fools, every last one of them. You are the most extraordinary woman I have ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that to you. Theresa, would you do me the immense honor of becoming my wife? Will you build this ranch with me, build a life with me, and let me love you the way you deserve to be loved for all the years we have left?" The ring in the box was simple but beautiful, a small diamond set in gold that must have cost him dearly. Through her tears, Theresa saw not just the ring but everything it represented: trust, partnership, love, respect, a future she had stopped letting herself imagine. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, Tobias, absolutely yes." He stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was kissing her, deep and passionate and full of promise. Theresa kissed him back with everything she had, every lonely year, every disappointed hope, every secret dream she had buried, all of it transforming into this moment of pure joy. When they finally broke apart, both were crying and laughing simultaneously. Tobias cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. "I love you," he said. I will spend every day making sure you never doubt that. I love you too, Theresa replied. I did not think this was possible for me anymore. I had convinced myself I did not need it, did not want it, but I was wrong. I just needed the right person. They stayed at the ranch until the candles burned low, making plans and dreaming together. Tobias would continue working for Thompson until spring to save additional money for stock and supplies. Theresa would sell the store, which should bring enough to fund significant improvements to the ranch house. They would marry in February, a small ceremony with just close friends, and by March they would be ready to start their life together in earnest. When Margaret returned to collect Theresa, she took one look at their faces and the ring glinting on Theresa's finger, and let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way back to town. The ride home was filled with excited chatter as Theresa shared every detail of the proposal, still hardly believing it was real. News of the engagement spread through Knights Ferry like wildfire. The reactions were mixed, as Theresa had expected. Some people were genuinely happy for her. Others seemed almost offended that she had managed to find happiness after all, as if her spinsterhood had been a fixed point in their world and changing it disrupted their sense of order. Mrs. Henderson stopped Theresa outside the church the following Sunday. "Well," she said stiffly, "I suppose congratulations are in order, though marrying in such haste at your age seems rather desperate." Theresa looked at the older woman and felt, for the first time in her life, genuinely free of her opinion. "Mrs. Henderson, I have spent over a decade living according to what people in this town thought I should be. I am finished with that. I am marrying a good man who loves me, and we are going to build something beautiful together. Whether you approve or not is entirely irrelevant to my happiness." Mrs. Henderson's face turned an impressive shade of purple, but Theresa simply walked away, Tobias waiting for her at the church steps with a proud smile on his face. Selling the store proved easier than expected. A young couple moving west from Ohio jumped at the opportunity, offering Theresa a fair price and eager to take over as soon as possible. Packing up her father's legacy was bittersweet, but Theresa reminded herself that he would have wanted her to be happy, not trapped by obligation to his memory. December passed in a flurry of preparations. Margaret threw herself into planning the wedding with the enthusiasm of a general organizing a campaign. The ceremony would be held in the small church, with a reception at Margaret's house afterward. Theresa sewed her own wedding dress, ivory silk with seed pearl buttons, working late into the nights as snow began to fall outside her windows. Tobias spent every spare moment working on the ranch house. He patched the roof, replaced window panes, and built new kitchen cabinets with his own hands. When Theresa visited on Sundays, she could see the transformation taking shape, the house slowly becoming a home. Christmas arrived, and Theresa spent it at Margaret's house surrounded by warmth and friendship. Tobias gave her a leather-bound journal with blank pages. "For writing down our story," he said. "Everything we build, everything we do. I want you to record it so someday we can look back and remember how it all began." She gave him new leather work gloves and a photograph she had commissioned at the traveling photographer's studio the week before, a portrait of herself in her engagement ring and best dress. "So you have something of mine when you are working long days and I am not there," she explained. He looked at the photograph for a long moment, then at her, and the emotion in his eyes made her breath catch. "I am the luckiest man alive," he said simply. January brought bitter cold and the final preparations for the wedding. Theresa said goodbye to her house, the place where she had lived alone for 2 years, building a life of quiet independence. She gave most of her furniture to families in need, keeping only the pieces with sentimental value that would fit in the ranch house. On the last night before the wedding, Margaret insisted Theresa stay at her house to maintain the tradition of the bride and groom not seeing each other before the ceremony. They sat up late talking, wrapped in quilts before the fire. "Are you nervous?" Margaret asked. Theresa considered the question honestly. "Not about marrying Tobias. I am more certain of that than anything I have ever done. But I would be lying if I said I was not nervous about what comes after. Running a ranch is hard work. Building a life with someone after being alone for so long will be an adjustment. What if I am not good at being a wife?" Margaret squeezed her hand. "You will be exactly who you have always been, just with a partner now. That is all marriage is, Theresa. Finding someone who wants to build something with you, who sees you completely and chooses you anyway. Tobias knows who you are. He fell in love with the real you, not some docile version you tried to present. Trust that." The words settled something anxious in Theresa's chest, and she slept that night with surprising peace. February 14th arrived cold but sunny, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed to promise good things. Theresa dressed carefully in her ivory silk, Margaret fussing over every button and ribbon. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because she looked so different, but because she looked truly happy for the first time in years. The worry lines had smoothed, the tight set of her mouth had relaxed, and her eyes sparkled with genuine joy. The church was decorated simply with pine boughs and white ribbons. It was not a large gathering, just the people who truly mattered. Margaret and her husband, a few friends from town who had always been kind to Theresa, Mr. Thompson and some of the ranch hands who worked with Tobias. Conspicuously absent were Mrs. Henderson and her circle, but Theresa found she did not care at all. When the music began, and Theresa walked down the aisle alone, having no father to give her away and refusing to pretend otherwise, she saw Tobias waiting at the altar and nearly wept at the expression on his face. He looked at her like she was the sun breaking through clouds, like she was everything good in the world condensed into one person. The ceremony was short and traditional. They spoke their vows clearly, promising to love and honor each other through whatever life brought. When the reverend pronounced them husband and wife and Tobias kissed her, the small gathering erupted in applause and cheers. The reception at Margaret's house was cheerful and warm, filled with good food and laughter. Tobias never left Theresa's side, his hand always finding hers, his eyes constantly drawn back to her face as if he could not quite believe she was real. When they finally departed in the late afternoon, heading to the ranch that was now their shared home, the entire party gathered outside to wave them off. The house was warm when they arrived, Tobias having arranged for someone to light the fires earlier. Inside, he lifted Theresa over the threshold and set her down gently in the center of the main room. Candlelight flickered on surfaces, and through the windows the last rays of sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. "Welcome home, Mrs. Turner," Tobias said softly. Theresa looked around at the house they would fill with life and love, at the man who had seen value in her when the world said she had none, and felt a joy so profound it took her breath away. "Welcome home," she echoed, and pulled him down for a kiss that held all the promise of their future. That night, as they lay together in the bedroom Tobias had prepared so carefully, wrapped in quilts against the winter cold, Theresa felt the last pieces of her old life fall away. The loneliness, the resignation, the belief that she was somehow less than because she had not followed the expected path. All of it disappeared, replaced by the solid warmth of Tobias beside her and the certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. "Are you happy?" Tobias asked, his voice drowsy in content. "I did not know I could be this happy," Theresa admitted. "For so long I told myself that contentment was enough, that I did not need more. But this, Tobias, this is everything I did not know to want." He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We are going to have a good life, Theresa. I promise you that. It will not always be easy, but it will be ours, built by our own hands, and it will be good." She believed him completely. Spring arrived in a rush of green and growth. The ranch consumed their days with endless work. Tobias taught Theresa to ride properly. Not the side-saddle method she had learned as a girl, but the practical astride method ranch women used. She proved a quick study, soon accompanying him on rides to check fences and survey their small herd of cattle they had purchased with the money from selling the store. Theresa discovered she loved the work despite its difficulty. Her body ached in new ways, her hands developed new calluses, and she fell into bed exhausted every night. But it was the exhaustion of accomplishment, of building something tangible. Every repaired fence post, every healthy calf born, every improvement to the house was proof of their shared efforts. She kept the books for the ranch as she had for the store, her head for numbers proving invaluable as they tracked expenses and income. Tobias deferred to her judgment on financial matters without ego, trusting her expertise. In turn, she trusted his knowledge of cattle and horses, learning everything he could teach her about reading weather, spotting illness in animals, and understanding the rhythms of ranch life. They developed patterns and routines that became the bedrock of their marriage. Morning coffee together before the workday began. Evening meals eaten at the kitchen table Tobias had built, talking over the day's events. Sundays off when possible, spent reading together or exploring their property or entertaining the occasional visitor. Margaret came often, delighted by Theresa's transformation from town spinster to confident ranch wife. "You are blooming," she told Theresa one afternoon in April as they sat on the porch shelling peas. "I have never seen you so settled in your own skin." "I feel settled," Theresa agreed. "Like I finally found the place I was meant to be all along. It is strange, is it not? I thought happiness was in doing everything myself, proving I did not need anyone. But this partnership with Tobias, building something together, it is so much richer than anything I had alone." By summer, the ranch was thriving in small but significant ways. Their cattle herd was healthy, the garden Theresa had planted was producing abundantly, and they had even acquired chickens that provided fresh eggs daily. The house had become truly beautiful through their combined efforts, with curtains Theresa sewed hanging in every window and furniture they had either built or bought second-hand and refinished together. In August, Theresa realized she was pregnant. The discovery brought mixed emotions, excitement tinged with fear. At 33, she was considered old for a first pregnancy, and the dangers were well known. But when she told Tobias, his joy was so pure and complete that her fears diminished. "We are going to have a family," he said wonderingly, his hand on her still flat stomach. "A child, Theresa, our child." "Are you ready for this?" she asked, needing reassurance. "Everything will change." "Everything already changed when I met you," Tobias replied. "This is just the next chapter of that change, and I cannot wait to live it with you." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall. Theresa continued working as long as she was able, only gradually reducing her activities as her body grew round and movements became more difficult. Tobias became almost comically protective, constantly worried she was doing too much, carrying too much, working too hard. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she would remind him with exasperation and affection. "I know, but you are carrying something infinitely precious," he would reply. "Humor me." In late February, during a cold snap that painted ice on the windows, Theresa's labor began. Margaret came immediately, bringing the doctor from Knights Ferry. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when fear crept into the room. But Theresa was strong, strengthened by years of hard work and harder choices, and when the baby finally arrived in the early hours of the morning, it was with a loud, healthy cry that made everyone laugh with relief. "A son," the doctor announced, placing the squalling infant on Theresa's chest. "Congratulations, Mrs. Turner." Theresa looked down at the tiny, perfect face of her son and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. All her life she had been told she was too much, too strong, too independent. But looking at this child born to her at 34, she realized she was exactly enough. Everything she had been through, every lonely year, every moment of doubt had led to this moment. Tobias knelt beside the bed, tears streaming unashamedly down his face as he touched his son's tiny hand. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Theresa, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas after Theresa's father, and he became the center of their world. The ranch work continued, adjusted now to accommodate an infant, and they learned the exhausting rhythm of new parenthood together. Tobias proved a devoted father, walking the floor with Thomas when he cried at night, changing diapers without complaint, and spending hours simply staring at his son with wonder on his face. Spring came again, bringing renewal and growth. Thomas thrived, growing rapidly and displaying what Tobias called his mother's stubborn determination. Theresa watched her son and her husband together and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was what she had been waiting for without knowing it. Not just marriage, not just motherhood, but this specific life with these specific people. On Theresa's 34th birthday, Tobias surprised her with a newly broken horse, a gentle mare perfect for riding while holding Thomas in a sling. "So you never have to feel trapped," he explained. "So you can always have the freedom to ride out and see the land, even with our son." The gesture, so thoughtful and so perfectly suited to who she was, made her love him even more deeply. That evening, with Thomas asleep in his cradle and the sun setting over their land, they sat together on the porch they had built with their own hands. "You ever miss it?" Tobias asked. "The store, the town, your old independence?" Theresa considered the question seriously. "I miss my father sometimes, and I miss the simplicity of those days. But I do not miss the loneliness, and I do not miss feeling like I was only half alive. This life, Tobias, this life we have built, it is everything, more than everything, even though it is hard. Even though there are days when everything goes wrong and we fall into bed too exhausted to talk. Especially because of that," Theresa said firmly. "The hard work means something because we are building it together. Every fence we repair, every calf that survives, every night we collapse exhausted, it is all part of our story, and I would not trade a single moment of it for an easier path." Tobias pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead. Inside, Thomas made a small sound in his sleep, and they both automatically tensed, listening to see if he would wake. When he settled back into silence, they relaxed again, smiling at each other over their shared instinct. The years rolled forward in the inexorable way of life. Thomas grew from an infant to a toddler to a bright, curious boy who followed his father everywhere and peppered his mother with endless questions. The ranch expanded gradually, more cattle, more land, more improvements. They built a barn that made Tobias proud and added a room to the house for Thomas when he grew too big for his cradle. When Thomas was 3, Theresa became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy came with more confidence and less fear, though Tobias still fretted endlessly. Their daughter arrived on a warm October afternoon, smaller than Thomas had been but equally healthy and strong. They named her Margaret Rose, after Theresa's dearest friend, and she completed their family in a way that felt absolutely right. The ranch became known throughout the region as one of the most well-run operations, a testament to the partnership at its heart. People who had once whispered about Theresa, the spinster now spoke with respect about Mrs. Turner, the rancher's wife who kept books like a businessman and could ride as well as any cowhand. The transformation was complete, though Theresa herself never thought much about it. She was too busy living her life to worry about how others perceived it. Margaret, true friend that she was, visited regularly with her own growing family, and the children played together while the women worked and talked. "Remember when you thought you would never have this?" Margaret said one afternoon as they watched Thomas teach little. Margaret rose to pet a newborn calf. "Remember how convinced you were that happiness was not in the cards for you?" "I remember," Theresa said softly. "I remember thinking 33 was the end of possibility. I had no idea it was actually the beginning." The friendship between the families deepened over time. Margaret's husband and Tobias worked together on various projects, their ranches helping each other through difficulties and celebrating each other's successes. It was the kind of community Theresa had always wanted but never found in the gossipy confines of town. On Theresa's 40th birthday, the family celebrated with a party at the ranch. Friends and neighbors came from miles around, filling their house and yard with laughter and warmth. Thomas, now 7, helped serve cake with serious concentration. Margaret Rose, 4 years old and fearless, climbed everything she could reach while Tobias followed nervously behind. That night, after everyone had left and the children were asleep, Theresa and Tobias stood on their porch looking at the land they had tamed together. 7 years had passed since their wedding day, and the ranch had become everything they had dreamed. "Do you remember the first time you brought me here?" Theresa asked. "When the house was empty and you were so nervous showing me your dreams." "I remember thinking you would see past the emptiness to what it could be," Tobias replied. "And you did. You saw it more clearly than I did, actually. Every improvement we have made, you have had a hand in planning." "We make a good team," Theresa said simply. "The best team," Tobias agreed. He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. 7 years married, and I love you more now than I did standing in that church. Every year, every day, I fall more in love with you. With your strength, your intelligence, your stubbornness, everything. You are my partner in the truest sense, Theresa. This ranch, these children, this life, none of it would mean anything without you." Theresa felt tears prick her eyes, the good kind, the kind that came from joy rather than sorrow. "I spent so long thinking I was not meant for this kind of happiness, that being strong meant being alone. But you showed me that real strength is in partnership, in trusting someone enough to build something together. You gave me a life beyond anything I imagined possible." They kissed in the starlight, two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment, when both were ready to build rather than simply survive. Around them, their ranch stretched into the darkness, solid and real, proof of what could be created when two people worked together toward a common dream. The children grew and changed with the seasons. Thomas developed his father's love for horses, and his mother's head for numbers, equally comfortable in the saddle or helping with the ranch accounts. Margaret Rose proved to have a gift with animals, able to gentle the most skittish horse or stubborn cow with patience and soft words. When Thomas was 12 and Margaret Rose was 9, a drought hit the valley. It was the hardest year the ranch had faced, with water scarce and pastures turning brown. Other ranches failed, Families packed up and moved on, but the Turners held firm. Theresa's careful financial planning meant they had reserves to draw on. Tobias's knowledge of the land helped them find hidden springs and water sources, and the whole family worked together, harder than ever before, to keep their cattle alive and their ranch functioning. The drought broke finally in the spring, and when the rains came, they all stood in the yard and let the water pour over them, laughing and crying simultaneously with relief. That night, as they changed into dry clothes, Thomas said seriously, "We almost lost everything, did we not?" "We came close," Tobias admitted, seeing no point in lying to his son. "But we survived because we worked together, and because your mother's planning left us options other ranches did not have." Thomas looked at Theresa with new respect. "When I have my own ranch someday, I want a partner like you and Pa have. Someone to work with, not someone who just does what I say." "That is the secret," Theresa told him, pride filling her chest. "Find someone you respect as much as you love and build something together. That is what makes a marriage last." The years continued their steady march forward. Thomas grew tall and strong, eventually taking over more of the ranch work as Tobias's body began to feel the toll of decades of hard labor. Margaret Rose surprised everyone by developing a talent for breeding horses, her patient work producing foals that commanded premium prices across the region. When Theresa was 45, she became a grandmother. Thomas, now 21, married a schoolteacher from Stockton and brought her to live on the property in a small house they built together. Their first child, a daughter with Theresa's auburn hair, arrived the following spring. Holding her granddaughter, Theresa was struck by the enormous arc of her life. From spinster, storekeeper resigned to loneliness, to wife, mother, and now grandmother, all because one cowboy had seen her value when the world said she had none. Margaret Rose chose a different path, announcing at 18 that she wanted to study veterinary medicine. It was an unconventional choice for a woman, but Theresa and Tobias supported her dream without question. She left for school in San Francisco, writing long letters home about her studies and adventures, always emphasizing that she would return to the ranch once qualified. On Theresa's 50th birthday, the entire family gathered for a celebration that spanned 2 days. Children and grandchildren filled every corner of the house. Friends old and new came to pay their respects to a woman who had become something of a legend in the valley. The spinster who had bloomed late into one of the region's most respected ranch women, living proof that life could begin at any age if you were brave enough to reach for it. That night, exhausted but happy, Theresa and Tobias retreated to their bedroom, now familiar and comfortable after nearly 20 years together. They sat on the edge of the bed they had shared through countless nights, through good times and hard times, through the building of their entire life together. 17 years ago today, I proposed to you in an empty house lit by candles, Tobias said quietly. Do you remember what you were thinking in that moment before you said yes? Theresa smiled, the memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday. I was thinking that I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and I could either step back into safety or jump into the unknown. And then I realized the unknown with you was infinitely better than any safety I could find alone. Best decision you ever made? Tobias asked with a slight grin. Second best, Theresa corrected. The best decision was that day I let myself believe I was worth more than the world said I was. That moment in the store when you first spoke to me with real respect, and I chose to meet that respect rather than deflect it. Everything else flowed from that choice. Tobias pulled her close, his body still strong despite the silver threading through his hair and the lines time had etched around his eyes. We built something good here, did we not? Against all odds, despite what people said, we built something that will last. We did, Theresa agreed. And it is not finished yet. We have years ahead of us, grandchildren to watch grow, the ranch to continue improving. Our story is still being written. They lay together in the darkness, listening to the sounds of their family settling in various rooms throughout the house. Outside, the ranch they had built from dreams and determination stretched out under starlight, home to generations now. The cattle lowed softly in the distance. An owl called from the oak tree by the barn. Life continued in its eternal rhythms. "I love you," Tobias whispered as sleep began to claim him. "Every day, every moment, I love you." "I love you too," Theresa replied. "More than I ever thought possible to love someone. You saw me when I was invisible. You valued me when the world said I had no value. You gave me everything I never knew to hope for." Sleep came gently, wrapping them in peace earned through years of hard work and genuine partnership. But before she fully drifted off, Theresa had one last thought, clear and bright as a bell. She had been 33 when her life truly began. 33 when a cowboy looked past what everyone else saw and recognized her worth. 33 when she learned that it was never too late for happiness, never too late for love, never too late to build something beautiful. The years before had not been wasted. They had been preparation, tempering her into someone strong enough to appreciate what she found. In the morning, she would wake to another day of work and family and the life she had built. But in this moment, hovering between waking and sleep, she let herself feel profound gratitude for every step that had led her here, for the loneliness that had taught her self-reliance, for the strength that had sustained her through hard years, for the openness that had let her recognize love when it finally arrived. The story that began with a dusty cowboy walking into a general store had become a legacy that would span generations. Children and grandchildren would grow up hearing how Grandma Theresa had been considered unmarriable at 32, how she had resigned herself to a life alone, how everything changed on her 33rd birthday when a cowboy proposed by candlelight in an empty house. They would learn that it was never too late to find happiness, never too late to take chances, never too late to build something extraordinary. But that was all still to come. For now, Theresa slept peacefully beside the man who had given her the world, in the house they had built with their own hands, surrounded by the family they had created together. And in her dreams, she rode across golden hills under endless sky, forever young, forever free, forever exactly where she belonged, the end.